Stop. Just for a second. I know you've got a million things going on. I know the feed never stops. Life never stops. The pressure never stops. But I need you to stay here with me for a few minutes. Not because this video is pretty or because I've got something mind-blowing to show you, but because there's something you need to hear today. And I genuinely believe, like for real, that you didn't stumble onto this video by accident. My name is George, and I'm not the kind of guy who comes here with a neat little answer for everything. I don't have some perfect script for how the spiritual life works. What I have is honesty. What I have is what I've lived, what I've messed up, what I've cried about without even knowing why, and what I learned on the other side of all of it. On this channel, I talk about faith, about purpose, about what happens when life doesn't go the way you planned, and you still choose to keep believing. No polish, no stage speech, just real talk. If you're new here, welcome. Hit subscribe because this is just one of many conversations we're going to have. All right, let's get real. Let me ask you something straight up. Have you ever been in a season of your life where the sky just felt closed? Where you prayed and the answer just never came? Where you were doing everything right, seeking, fasting, reading, trying, and it still felt like your words were hitting the ceiling and bouncing back? I've been there, and I know it's a lonely place in a way that's almost impossible to explain to someone who's never felt it. Because it's not just the silence that hurts. It's what the silence starts whispering to you. Those voices that show up in the quietest moments, 3 in the morning, when there's not enough noise to drown them out. Is God even listening to me? Did I do something wrong that shut this whole thing down? Is my faith just not enough? Am I just lying to myself about all of this? And here's what nobody tells you. Those questions aren't a sign that your faith is weak. They're a sign that you're human. They're a sign that you're being honest with God in a way that a lot of people are too scared to be. But there's something I need you to understand about God's silence. And this might completely shift the way you see the season you're in right now. God's silence is not abandonment. It never has been. God's silence is actually one of the most active environments there is, because that's where the deepest formation happens. Think about it. When a musician is composing a complex piece, there are deliberate moments of silence written into the score. Those moments aren't mistakes. They're not blank spots. They're essential parts of the composition. The music doesn't make sense without them. And the life God is composing with you doesn't either. The silence isn't the end of the song. It's part of it. But I get it. Knowing that doesn't take away the pain of being in the middle of the silence. So let's talk about what actually happens inside that process, because that's where things get really interesting. There's a question I hear all the time, from people with genuine faith, people who truly love God, people who aren't looking for an excuse for anything. The question is, why me? Why does it always feel like I take harder hits than everyone else? And I'll be straight with you. I don't have a clean, gift-wrapped theological answer for that. But what I do have is a pattern, one that shows up over and over again in the stories of people who were called to something bigger, and it's too consistent to ignore. The people with the greatest calling go through the most intense process. Not as punishment, not as bad luck, but because the destiny God has for them requires a level of formation that comfortable experiences simply cannot produce. Take the story of Joseph. This is one of the clearest examples out there. But when you actually stop and read it carefully, not as a story you've heard 100 times, the cruelty of what he went through is shocking. Joseph was a young guy with genuine faith, with dreams that came from God, with a heart that had no bitterness in it, and his own brothers, not enemies, not strangers, but his own flesh and blood, looked at him and felt an envy so violent that they decided to snuff out whatever was in him. First they wanted to kill him. Then they decided to just throw him in a pit. Then they sold him as a slave to a caravan passing through. And Joseph ended up in Egypt, far from home, far from his father, far from everything he knew, not knowing if he'd ever see his family again, not understanding why any of it was happening. And then, just when things started to get a little better, when he'd earned his master's trust, when life was starting to make some sense, a false accusation hit. Potiphar's wife lied about him, and he got thrown in prison. More years, more silence, more waiting with no answers. Now stop and put yourself in his shoes, not with the end of the story in your head. Because he didn't have the end of the story in his head. He was living the middle, the pit, the slavery, the prison, and he had no idea if it was ever going to end. What would you be feeling? What would you be thinking about God? About the dreams he'd been given? About the promise he believed was real? Because I know what I'd be thinking, and it wouldn't be pretty. But here's the point that changes everything once you really get it. God wasn't sleeping. God was building, inside of Joseph, the things Joseph was going to need to carry the weight of the destiny that was coming. A humility that slavery forges in a way no school can teach. A resilience that only comes from an unjust prison sentence. A capacity to forgive that only exists in someone who was truly betrayed and survived it. An emotional wisdom that only comes from someone who's been on both extremes, from the pit to the palace, and understood that neither one defines who you are. If Joseph had gone straight to the palace, skipping the process, he wouldn't have had what it took to govern. The destiny was real from the start, but Joseph wasn't yet the person that destiny required. And God, with a patience only he has, kept forming that person while Joseph's whole world seemed to be falling apart. The same thing is happening with you. What looks like destruction in your life might actually be the most intense formation session you'll ever go through. And on the other side of it, you're going to understand why it had to be exactly like this. There's a perspective here I think is worth naming, because it completely changes how you read the opposition you face. Envy never targets the mediocre. Think about that. Joseph's brothers didn't try to destroy him because he was weak, because he was irrelevant, because he didn't matter. They tried to destroy him because they saw something in him that threatened them, something that shone differently, something that came from a place they couldn't access. And that plays out in your life too. If you've had people trying to cut you down for no apparent reason, if you've been sabotaged by someone who was supposed to support you, if you've faced opposition that seemed way out of proportion to what you were even trying to do, pay attention to that. Because opposition always reveals the value of the target. Nobody surrounds an empty territory. Nobody attacks a worthless field. The intensity of the resistance you face is often directly tied to the magnitude of what's being built in you. I know that doesn't make the pain smaller when you're in the middle of it. When you're losing your job, when your relationship is falling apart, when you don't know how you're gonna pay the bills this month, when your health is throwing up warning signs. Nobody wants to hear that this is a sign of potential. But when the storm passes, and you look back with the eyes of someone who survived it, you're going to see the pattern. You're going to understand that every attack had a specific address, and that address was exactly where your calling was being formed. Let me tell you what preparation actually feels like from the inside, because nobody talks about this honestly. Preparation feels like confusion. It feels like waiting with no end date. It feels like the discomfort of being stretched past what you thought you could handle. It feels like you're going in circles, when really you're climbing a spiral. It looks like the same place, but you're on a different level now. Preparation feels like a transition where you're no longer who you were, but you haven't arrived at who you're becoming yet. And that in-between space is the most uncomfortable of all. because you've let go of the old identity, but haven't fully stepped into the new one. You're caught between two versions of yourself, and that creates an anxiety that's hard to explain to someone who's never lived it. And there's more. In a season of preparation, the things that used to make sense in your life start not making sense anymore. Relationships that fit your old life start to feel like they don't quite fit. Places you used to go start to feel too small. Conversations that used to feed you start to feel shallow. And you think something is wrong with you, that you're getting arrogant, that you're pulling away from people. But something else is happening. You're growing. And growth always creates a kind of awkward discomfort, because you now occupy a different space than you did before. A tree that's grown isn't ungrateful for the pot that held it when it was just a seedling. But it can't fit in the pot anymore. That's not the tree's fault, and it's not the pot's fault. It's just the natural result of growth. I want to talk about the nights, because I think that's when you really see what a process is made of. During the day, you can keep up appearances. You can say, "I'm good," when someone asks. You can smile in pictures, function, go to work, show up. The distraction helps during the day. But at night, when the noise stops, when your phone goes quiet, when there's nothing left to do, that's when everything comes. The doubt, the longing, the fear. The question you don't say out loud because you're embarrassed to ask it. That tightness in your chest that you can't quite place, but it's there every single night. And that's exactly when God is closer than he seems. There's a verse in Psalms, I always come back to this one, where David writes with brutal honesty about exactly that. He wasn't pretending to be okay. He wasn't putting on a spiritual performance. He was talking to God from a place of real pain, real confusion, a real night. And what that tells me is this: you don't have to show up in God's presence with everything together. You can show up with everything broken. In fact, sometimes the brokenness is what opens up space for his presence to come in a way that couldn't happen when everything was in order. Your hard nights aren't evidence that God left. They're the environment where he works the deepest. The turning point rarely feels like a turning point when it's happening. It doesn't come with a fanfare. There's no neon sign flashing, "New season starts here." It comes almost imperceptibly, and you only realize it happened when you look back a few months later. It starts with a peace you can't explain. Not that the problems disappeared. Not that everything got resolved. It's just that suddenly there's a stillness inside you, even with chaos all around. A sense that, despite everything, it's okay. That somehow, in a way you don't fully understand yet, it's going to work out. Then comes the clarity. Those questions that went unanswered for so long start getting some answers. Not all at once, not dramatically, but like a fog slowly lifting. And you start seeing connections you couldn't see before. You start understanding why certain doors closed. You start seeing the thread running through experiences that seemed completely unrelated. And then come the coincidences that aren't really coincidences. The right person shows up at the right moment. An opportunity comes out of nowhere. But when you look close, you realize you spent years being prepared for exactly this. A conversation happens and opens a door you didn't even know existed. And you start to get it. What looked like wasted time was training. What looked like a detour was the route. What looked like God's silence was God working in dimensions you couldn't see. Nothing was wasted. Not the tears. Not the years. Not the long nights. Not the prayers that seemed to go unheard. Not the doors that got shut in your face. Not the people who let you down. Not the versions of yourself you had to leave behind. Every single second was counted. Every pain was used. Every detour was part of the journey. I know there's someone watching this video right now who's at the hardest point. Not at the beginning, where you still have energy and your faith is still fresh. not at the end, where you can already see the other side. You're in the middle, and the middle is the most treacherous place, because you've already burned through the energy from the start, and you don't have the payoff from the finish line yet. It's just faith. Dry faith. Faith without feeling. Faith that keeps going when there's absolutely no evidence to justify it. And I want to speak directly to you right now. Don't quit in the middle. Not because it'll be easy tomorrow. Not because the pain will be gone next week. But because you've already gotten through the hardest part. And I know that sounds impossible to believe right now. But it's true. The fact that you're still here, after everything you've been through, is already proof that there's something in you that cannot be destroyed. And that something that cannot be destroyed is exactly what God is using. The most fertile soil is the soil that's been most thoroughly turned. Ground that's never been plowed doesn't produce a harvest. Ground that's been broken up, that's been torn through, that's felt the weight of the plow. That's the ground that produces a crop that feeds a whole generation. You're being plowed right now, and it's going to produce so much more than you can imagine from inside the process. There's one last thing I want to say to you, and I really need you to hear this. The story God is writing with your life isn't just about you. I know that sounds cliché, but stop and actually think about it. When Joseph finally made it to the palace, when he was elevated to governor of Egypt, his destiny wasn't just about him prospering. His destiny was about feeding entire nations during a famine that would have killed millions of people. His destiny was about saving the very brothers who tried to destroy him. His destiny was about carrying forward a lineage that held a promise far greater than any of them could see. Your pain has a reach you haven't been able to measure yet. Your story of survival, your story of faith in the silence, your story of pressing on when every sign said to stop. That story is going to reach people that no other story could reach, because they'll hear it and they'll recognize themselves. They'll think, this person went through what I went through, and they're still here, so maybe I can be too. You're not going through this just for yourself. You're going through this to be living proof that is possible. To be the testimony that someone stuck in the pit right now needs to see to believe there's a way out. And that makes every piece of the process worth it. Before you close out this video, I want to ask you to do one concrete thing, not later. Right now, before you go. Grab your phone and open your Notes app, or grab a piece of paper if one's nearby. Write down 3 moments from the past few years that were the most painful in your life. Doesn't have to be polished, doesn't have to make sense. Just write down what was hard. And next to each one, write an honest answer to this question. What did this experience develop in me that I didn't have before? Maybe it's patience. Maybe it's compassion. Maybe it's the ability to sit with someone who's hurting in a way you couldn't before. Maybe it's courage. Maybe it's a faith that was tested and survived. And that kind of faith is completely different from a faith that was never challenged. This exercise won't fix the pain, but it shifts the posture of your heart toward the process. And shifting the posture changes everything. You stop being dragged by the story and start narrating it. And the one who narrates can see what the one who's being dragged cannot. I could keep this conversation going for hours. And I will. In other videos, from other angles, with other stories. But what I want you to take from this video today is simple. You're not lost. You're being found. You're not behind. You're being prepared with a precision you can't see from where you're standing right now. You haven't been forgotten. You've been held by a hand you couldn't feel, but it was there through every night, every tear, every moment you thought you weren't going to make it, and you made it. Keep going. The process is working in your favor, especially now. especially when it feels like the opposite. Now go ahead and open the comments and tell me one thing. What was the moment in your journey when you doubted the most that you were going to make it? And what kept you going? I read the comments. For real. And sometimes the story you share here is exactly what someone sitting in the pit right now needs to read to believe there's a way out. If this video hit something real for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every week there's a new conversation here, and I want to keep this going with you. And if this content has meant something to you, and you want to support this work in some way, you'll find out how right here on the screen. Every little bit helps this message reach more people who need to hear it today. Thanks for sticking around. Genuinely. See you in the next one.